Carrasco. And thank you for reading.
Manny Pacquiao, the gold, I don't think there'll be a problem for Manny.
Has its share of great fights. But every once in a while, human mind can also be controlled for nothing. Again, happy nothing.
Ako po si Associated Filipino Political 4 p.m.
Only here, para sa bayan. And that's the opening bell for Round by Round, presented to you by Eastern Communications. Mabuhay Pilipinas, welcome world. I'm Boyet Sison.
And I'm Ryan Sangalia. Dennis Principe joins us later on in the show.
On this edition of Round by Round, we talk about how a boxing match, as evidenced by the recent Fury-Wilder fight, which went back and forth, can turn the other way around in the blink of an eye. Mga kaibigan, alam nyo, sa laro ng boxing, minsan, meron llamado, may dihado. Meron din na halos pantay yung labanan. At kung minsan, ang laban mismo, talagang balikan, ika nga, back and forth, sa wikang English. But to ask a boxing expert like Ryan Songalia, there have been a lot of fights that can turn the other way, di ba? In the blink of an eye, kumbaga, bigla na lang magbabago yung ihip ng hangin sa wikang Filipino. Ryan, explain to us how these things happen in a boxing match.
Well, boxing is unlike any other sport because in baseball, if you have bases loaded and a guy hits a home run, that's just 4 runs. But if you're down by 10, you're still losing by 6. In boxing, you can hit a 12, 15-run home run. You can hit, instead of just a 3-pointer, you can hit a 50-point shot just because it can turn around in a second like that. So that's what I think is the beauty of boxing. It's the theater of the unexpected. Just when you think a fight is over, one shot can literally turn it around, and then whatever happened in the previous 5-6 rounds doesn't matter anymore because they don't pay out bets at halftime, in the middle of the fight. You got to make it to the final bell for any of that to count. So I think that's what makes boxing unique. And Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder showed that on the highest stage because, there are so many times where boxing fights don't live up to the expectations. But when they do, and even when they exceed the expectations, there's nothing better than that in all sports. And I'm just glad that when people were watching boxing lived up to all of the great things that it can be. That fight was, in many ways, an advertisement for what boxing can be when it's done well, when everything comes together. It's a great time. It's, instead of just sitting around talking about the drama of the, controversial scorecards, we got to see with finality, with conclusiveness, a heavyweight championship decided with one guy standing victorious and the other guy on the floor. That's the way it should be. Like Freddie Roach said, every fight should end in a knockout.
Are there other fights in past memory? Can you tell us about other fights or other matchups that really went this way? That it was really back and forth. You really cannot tell who would come out the victor, but as you've said, in the blink of an eye, the tide changed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because I count the Wilder Fury fights as one of the great heavyweight championship trilogies. Now, of course, a lot of people feel that the fights that had in the past, you can't really compare them, because it's, history. But I think this fight deserves to belong with those. Now, when I'm thinking about the direct comparisons, the fights that come up to me are Ingemar Johansson against Floyd Patterson. Two guys who...
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
They traded knockdowns like most boxers trade jabs. So it's hard to really state which was the most violent of all the fights. But the first fight was very one-sided in favor of Johansson, who lifted the heavyweight championship. And then Patterson turned that around in the rematch and knocked Ingemar Johansson cold with a left hook that left Johansson's leg twitching like a branch in the wind. It was kind of scary. Mm-hmm. And then the third fight kind of resembled the third fight of Fury Wilder, where both guys get knocked down. You don't know what's going to happen. It can go either way. And in the end, it was Patterson who stood victorious, and he won the trilogy. Another fight that reminds me of the third fight is the Holyfield versus Riddick Bowe third fight.
Yes.
Because that was a fight where, the first two fights were very well competed, but the third fight didn't have the heavyweight championship on the line. It had the heavyweight championship of each other on the line, and that was enough to really bring out the best of them. Both of them wanted to show that they were the better of the two. And that was, in my opinion, the most violent, destructive of those three fights. Now, you had Riddick Bowe was just beating up Evander Holyfield. Holyfield had some heart troubles, and he was showing his energy levels were going up and down. And in that fight, Joe Cortez, the referee, actually brings in Flip Homansky, the ringside official in Las Vegas in those days.
Yeah.
And he's like telling him, listen, we're going to stop this fight. You're taking too much punishment. Cortez, I think, was also kind of trying to interject himself into a pivotal role in the fight. And he had a nasty back and forth with Tommy Brooks, the trainer of Holyfield. But that was enough to get Holyfield to wake up and show one last burst of energy. And he knocked down Riddick Bowe for the first time in Bowe's career.
Yeah, Joe, going back a bit. How about a Tommy Hearns, Sugar Ray Leonard, and a Ali Frazier matchup? How were those fights as far as the back and forth was concerned?
I mean, in terms of the ebb and flow, yeah, I would say that those were fights where, particularly the third fight of the Ali Frazier, that was the Thrilla Manila. That was a fight where the up until the last few rounds, the result was up to be had because Ali was a big favorite in that fight. Frazier was kind of seen as washed up by that point, but he was able to. He had a style that was always going to give Ali trouble, and Ali pulled out later in the fight. It wasn't like the big knockdown, drag him out kind of war that we've seen with Fury Wilder, because in that trilogy there was only one knockdown. There was the when Ali was dropped in the 15th of the first fight. Now, when you talk about Leonard and Hearns, the first fight that was back and forth as well, because Hearns was really getting to Leonard with the jab and causing his eye to swell up, and then later on we saw the tide, the roles really switched where Leonard became the aggressor and Hearns became the boxer. But then the rematch, I would say that was actually, even though it was a less celebrated fight, I thought it was a more of a entertaining fight from a boxing action standpoint, because you had Hearns getting hurt, but then you had Leonard getting dropped twice, and that was called a draw. But even Ray Leonard said, yeah, you know what? I think Tommy Hearns got that.
A lot of we can still talk about a lot of the other matchups that have really created a lot of resonance as far as the back and forth of a fight is, so to speak, and we will do that in future conversations, Ryan. So, mga kaibigan, in terms of how many fights or the many other fights that have created a lot of conversation even to this day, as far as fights that went back and forth and eventually turned the other way in the blink of an eye, we will discuss more of that in future episodes of Round by Round. Okay, mga kaibigan, on the second topic of our conversation with boxing expert Ryan Songalia, who was smoking a cigar earlier. Let us now talk about these Filipino boxers who are now trying to make a name for themselves in the international stage. And we start with a Filipino-Japanese who fought mainly in the Philippines and made his debut in Japan last week. And we're talking about Filipino-Japanese Go Osaka, who already has registered 4 wins by knockout. Ryan?
Yes. Go Osaka, for a lot of Filipino fans, they may have seen him when he fought. He was fighting under the Ala Boxing stable early in his career. He's his mother is Japanese. His mother is Filipino. His father is Japanese, and he was living in La Union. Very exciting southpaw, very aggressive, all out. Has a very strong left hand. But it turns out he ran into his first defeat this week. He lost to Ryo Nakai by a unanimous decision, 77-75. It was, from what I've read on Asian Boxing's website, it was an exciting fight. Hosaka probably learned a very serious lesson there. It's just different. There's a different level of competition. He had been fighting in the Philippines, and this was his second fight in Japan. And the Japanese fighters, especially in those lighter weights, are probably the best fighters in the world right now. So you can't write him off after one loss. He's 25 years old, and I have a feeling he'll be back. Very exciting fighter to watch. And he just knows how to get to his opponents. He probably has to be a little bit more subtle with it, because sometimes, from what I've seen, he goes straight in. He's there to be hit, and you can't just have those kinds of back and forth exchanges, throughout your career. It'll take its toll. He's already fighting at the 8-round level, so this is going to be, I think, something of a learning lesson for him.
Another fighter who is trying to make a name for himself, mga kaibigan, is a Filipino-British fighter named Youssef Kumari. Youssef was born in London to a Moroccan father and a Filipina mother, who's a native of Alibeng, Sison in Pangasinan. Ryan, as far as Kumari is concerned, how will his lineage of having a Moroccan father and a Filipino mother work well for him?
It's interesting. He'll be kind of like a latter-day Casablanca, perhaps. He's a very exciting fighter from what I've seen. He can box. He's a counterpuncher. He has a little, bit of a national amateur background in the UK. He told me that he actually got into boxing watching the first Pacquiao Morales card, and even though he's from London and his father's Moroccan, he has roots in the Philippines, as we mentioned, and he's even been to Pangasinan. He's seen his mother's home village. It would be great to see if he can fight in the U.S. I'm sorry, in the Philippines, because he has a lot of pride for being Filipino, and he's actually going to be having a big step up this month. He's fighting Jorge David Castaneda, who is 14-1, on the Dillian White Otto Wallin card in London later this month. That's for the interim WBC heavyweight title. Kumari is actually managed by Dillian White, so he has some class fighters around him, and it's going to be interesting to see as he steps up in class, what he does with his career, because he's a very driven young fighter.
And now, mga kaibigan, we now feature two brothers, 17 years old, both are around 5'11" in height. Junior featherweights with a very impressive background, and so far, no losses as far as the brothers are concerned. We're talking about Filipino Americans Chavez and Angel Barrientos. Ryan, tell us more about them.
Well, Angel Barrientos has one defeat, but he's come back from that. They both fight on the PBC stable there. Very deep amateur background. They're trained by the father. They're from Hawaii. They're Filipino Mexicans. So it's like they're like Pacquiao Morales is, walking Pacquiao Morales is, but they are built like Diego Corrales, right? Mm-hmm. So they're 5'11", fighting at 122 pounds. I think they're going to fill in as they get older. 19 years old. They have deep backgrounds in the amateur scene and on the junior level. They've won every single tournament that there is to win as juniors. The one thing is, I think that they have to adjust more to the professional style. Angel Barrientos, in his one defeat, he got caught a lot going straight back, and that's a no-no, in professional boxing. So they made some amateur mistakes, but I think as they get older, they will adjust. They're teenagers still, and they turn professional very young, and they didn't really get a chance to fight on the elite level, as open class boxers. So they're really kind of learning on the job. I don't care if you have 200 youth, junior Olympic title fights. When you're fighting against grown men, it's a different level. So that's something that they have to learn. But their success kind of reminds me of, the early 2000s when you had very good Filipino American talent coming up in the amateur scene. You know, you had Nonito Donaire, Glenn Donaire, Brian Valoria. Those were exciting times, Bruno Escalante, and I want to see what they can turn up, because these are some very well schooled fighters, and they've fought everyone at the on the national and international scene as teenagers.
For the next segment of today's program, we now turn it over to our colleague, Dennis Principe.
Thank you very much, Ryan and Boyet. We will be talking about itong future na meron si Mark Magsayo, while people are expecting na ang kanyang susunod na laban ay si Gary Russell Jr., ang WBC World Featherweight Champion, dahil yung huling panalo nga po ni Mark Magsayo ay sinasabi nga po, it was announced as a title eliminator. Ibig sabihin, kung sino po yung manalo ay magiging mandatory challenger ni Gary Russell Jr. Alam nyo, minsan or madalas, pambenta din lang naman yan. Hindi yan katulad sa ibang mga sports or liga, na kapag sinabing the winner will move on to the finals, kailangan mangyari yung finals na yun. Dito hindi. Marami pong mga negotiations, marami mga ways para hindi matuloy, lalo na kung hindi benta. Although syempre, meron ganong lumalabas na commitment. Depende na rin, of course, kung ipupush yan ng WBC. But if I am to be asked, alam nyo, para sa akin, after yung napakagandang performance ni Mark Magsayo sa kanyang huling laban, it was really very impressive. Sa tingin ko, mas maganda kung i-enhance pa ni Mark Magsayo yung kanyang marketability. Ito madalas natin pinag-usapan dito sa ating program, lalo na pagka mga bagong boksingero ang pinag-uusapan natin. So para sa akin, sa tingin ko, kailangan pa ng mga at least 2 laban, kahit na hindi muna World Championship, para mas bumango yung pangalan ni Mark Magsayo, mas gumanda at tumibay yung kanyang fan base, and at the same time, para sa akin, mas mapadali yung kanyang paglaban for the World Championship. Because if you talk of 2 fights, aabutin niya ng mga middle to late next year. Anong kagandahan nun? Kung ang iisipin natin ay yung pagiging mandatory challenger ni Mark Magsayo kay Gary Russell Jr. Yung Gary Russell Jr., medyo tatanda ng konti. He's now 33 years old. By next year, 34. Sa boxing, medyo papasok na yan dun sa sinasabing nagkakaedad na. So it will favor si Mark Magsayo. Malaki yung chance na maging ganun yung sitwasyon. Because Gary Russell, ang style nito is nagre-rely sa kanyang speed and timing. Not much on the power, although maganda yung kanyang knockout percentage. But alam mo, sa isang boksingero, madalas sa ating observation, ang nawawala talaga niyan una pagka nagkakaedad ay yung speed and power. So if you let Gary Russell Jr. to age a bit, mas maganda yun, because para sa akin, magbibigay ng malaking problema. Actually, si Jerry Peñalosa mismo nagsabi, magbibigay ng malaking problema kay Gary Russell, yung kanyang style dito kay Mark Magsayo. Sabi nga ni Parin Jerry, mas maganda pa nga kung yung Emmanuel Navarrete yung kalabanin. Maganda kasi kay Emmanuel Navarrete as compared kay Gary Russell. Mas malaking pera yung pwede makuha dyan ni Mark Magsayo dahil mas celebrated. At saka mas malaki yung fan base ni Emmanuel Navarrete as compared kay Gary Russell Jr. And another thing is that unlike Gary Russell Jr., mas nakikipaglaban itong si Navarrete. Mas exciting, mas may tapang, at lumalabas, yun ang parating magandang laban para kay Mark Magsayo. Yung bakbakan, hindi yung chess match. Hindi yung jab-jab, labas, pasok, labas. Ito kay Navarrete, all out to. Talagang patay kung patay. Yun yung mga tipong mas angkop kay Mark Magsayo. Ang sa akin lang, nakikita ko, masyado pang maaga, no? Kay Mark Magsayo na labanan si Emmanuel Navarrete, no? Sa tingin ko, again, babalik tayo, kung bibigyan pa ng dalawang laban si Mark Magsayo na quality opponents, say, lumaban ng isang former world champion, no? In this division, marami rin naman dyan, no? Mas gaganda, no? Yung kanyang skill, mas magi-improve. Now, if you talk of two fights, activity, quality fights for Mark Magsayo, chances are, baka umakyat pa yung Emmanuel Navarrete. Ako naniniwala, Emmanuel Navarrete is just waiting for the right opportunity to move up in weight. Dahil kung titignan po natin, featherweight compared sa super featherweight, mas maraming marquee fights dito sa super featherweight division. Una na dyan, yung Oscar Valdez. Imagine, Emmanuel Navarrete, Oscar Valdez, title fight, no? Siguradong tatabo yan sa takilya, no? So kung ikaw ay Emmanuel Navarrete, sino pipiliin mo? Kung bigyan ka ni Oscar Valdez ng laban o si Mark Magsayo? Siyempre, doon ka na sa taas. Wala ka nakikita magandang laban, no? Na panonoorin at bebenta sa featherweight division. Ano? So, with Emmanuel Navarrete moving up in weight, mas madali pa, no? Yung maging world champion si Mark Magsayo, because as of the moment, number 2 si Mark Magsayo, and malamang yan, maging number 1 na yan sa next ratings ng featherweight, dahil nga itong si Joet Gonzalez is coming off a loss kay Emmanuel Navarrete. So magiging mandatory challenger si Mark Magsayo ng WBO, at yun nga, baka mapalawang pa for the vacant title, sure ball na yan, no? Kung talagang aakyat na itong si Emmanuel Navarrete. Now, sinasabi ba natin iwasan si Navarrete? Totally? Hindi naman totally. Iwasan lang ngayon for the meantime. Gumawa ka muna ng pangalan mo, Mark Magsayo. Hayaan mo si Emmanuel Navarrete, umakyat ng super featherweight, kunin mo yung WBO belt, and then gawa ka ng sarili mong pangalan until such time na ikaw na yung mapunta ron sa level ni Emmanuel Navarrete, ni Oscar Valdez, ni Shakur Stevenson, no? Na celebrated fighter ka na rin. And who knows, baka pang pay-per-view pa. No? So it's just a matter of timing para kay Mark Magsayo. No? So the bottom line is, it's a very exciting future para kay Mark Magsayo, pero dapat mas lalo maging maingat, mas maging madiskarte, and if possible, wag magmadali, no? Si Mark Magsayo maging very prudent at mautak sa kanyang magiging desisyon in the next year, which I believe, in the next 1 year, which I believe will be very crucial pagdating sa kung ang pag-uusapan ay anong future meron si Mark Magnifico Magsayo. That's all for it. Para po sa akin dito, balik po tayo kay Boyet and Brian.
Thank you, Dennis. Now let's go to our Fearless Forecast, brought to you by Eastern Communications, and we will be featuring the showdown between Jimel Magramo and J.R. Raquinel, who have earned a much-deserved spot in the main event of the fight card of Johnny Elorde at the Elorde Sports Center in Parañaque City. The fight will be happening on October 23rd, 2021. Ryan, tell us more about this.
Well, Magramo, he is he's a little bit better known fighter. Of course, he comes from that family lineage of the Magramos, very tough fighters. One of them fought Pacquiao, gave Pacquiao a hell of a fight in Cebu a number of years ago. He's coming off of a knockout loss to Junto Nakatani for the WBO flyweight title. So he has a lot to prove, and this is a step forward, I think, for him to get back into the world title picture, because the vacant OPBF flyweight title is at stake. It's that's a belt that Flash Elorde held the OPBF title. That's a step forward towards getting a title shot with the WBC. So it looks like that's the path he's going down. I'm picking him to beat J.R. Raquinel. I think that this will be a tough fight because Raquinel, he has experience. He's a tough fighter too. I think this goes the distance, but Magramo, it seems like he does very well until he gets up to that world championship level. I think that he has a number of fights under his belt that should give him experience to get to another level. But I think this is going to be a tough fight for him. But I think he'll pull it out by decision.
Well,
That's a
you-
fearless forecast.
Yeah. Well, how much of a factor does a former title holder in the person of Raquel have against a Magramo who you have said has already improved as far as his fighting style is concerned?
Well, I think that Raquel, the one thing is, he's from Negros Occidental, which is where I think the best fighters in the Philippines come from nowadays. So he knows how to box. He's a southpaw, and the good thing that he has is that he has fought abroad. He's not just some guy from the province who's taken a big step up against a name fighter, a recognized fighter. He's fought in Dubai, he's fought in Japan, he's won in these places. He's fought in China. That was where his only defeat was. So he knows how to fight in hostile territory against good fighters. So he's not going to come down. He's not going to come here to lay down. But I just think that Magramo has a very well-schooled style. He knows how to win rounds. He's got a good jab. They call him the pistolero, but he's more of like a technician in my view. And I really think that he understands the tradition of being a Magramo. Melvin Magramo, Alvin Magramo, his brother. There's the whole family. They're fighters. These are just tough people, and I think that it would take a next level type of talent to beat Magramo in his home country.
Well, you heard it from the expert himself for our fearless forecast, Ryan Songalia, picking Jimel Magramo over J.R. Raquel for the OPBF flyweight title that will be happening on October 23rd, 2021. And that's our fearless forecast brought to you by Eastern Communications. And that's the final bell for today's episode of Round by Round, brought to you by Eastern Communications. I'm Boyet Sison.
And I'm Ryan Songalia. We're on Facebook 6 p.m. Monday through Friday and on our YouTube channel right after. So like, follow, share, and subscribe now.
On the next edition of our program, it'll be Bill Velasco, Ryan Songalia, and yours truly that will be answering the bell. This has been Round by Round. All boxing, all Filipino, all the time. Ingat po kayo.